The first thing I heard on my wedding day was not music. It was the hum of the air conditioner and the tiny dry sound of one rose petal slipping from my bouquet and landing on polished white tile. That sound still lives in me. It was so small, so soft. But in that moment, standing at the front of a carefully decorated hall, with rows of empty chairs staring back at me like a judgment, it felt louder than church bells. I was 34 years old and wearing a silk gown I had paid for myself, in a venue I had booked 9 months earlier, waiting for a family that had already decided I was optional. If you have ever had people look you straight in the face and promise they would be there, only to leave you standing in public with your dignity shaking in your hands, then you already know what kind of story this is. But the ceremony was supposed to begin at 4. By 4:45, the candles along the aisle had burned low enough to leave little puddles of wax in their glass holders. The florist's white hydrangeas was still fresh. The string quartet we had hired had stopped pretending to tune. Even the photographer had begun adjusting his camera with the restless desperation of a man hoping equipment problems might give him an excuse to disappear. My maid of honor, Tessa, stood beside me in pale blue chiffon and squeezed my hand so hard it almost hurt. "Do you want a few more minutes?" she asked quietly. No one else in that room would have asked it like that. Not hopefully, not dishonestly, just gently, like a person offering me the last shred of choice, left in a humiliating moment. I looked at the doors again, tall cream-colored doors, brass handles. It's absolutely still. "My family isn't coming," I said. The wedding coordinator shifted near the back of the hall, pretending to check something on her clipboard. I could smell peonies and cold air and the faint, sharp scent of champagne from the reception room next door, all of it ready for a celebration that suddenly felt like a joke someone had spent thousands of dollars setting up. Tessa's eyes softened. "Then we do this without them." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to be the kind of woman who could stand there, lift her chin, and glide through abandonment with cinematic grace. But there is the version of humiliation people imagine and the version your body actually feels. My throat was tight. My palms were damp against the stems of the bouquet. My chest hurt with that hot, hollow ache that comes when your pride is trying to stop your heart from breaking in public. "It's not just them missing it," I whispered. "It's that they chose something else." That was the true wound. Not an accident, not a freeway pileup, not an emergency room call, not bad weather or delayed flights or any other respectable tragedy people can gather around and forgive. They had chosen my younger brother. Again. My brother Nolan had announced the grand opening of his luxury auto showroom 6 weeks after I mailed my wedding invitations. He knew my date. So did my parents. So did everyone else. My mother had actually held the cream cardstock invitation in her hand at Sunday dinner, smiled in that careful way she always did when preparing to disappoint me, and said, "Well, this is awkward timing." Awkward timing. As if my wedding had drifted carelessly into the path of something more important. My father had not even looked sorry. "You know how big this is for Nolan," he said, cutting into his steak. "There'll be investors, press, local officials. He can't move it." I remember sitting there with my water glass in both hands because I knew if I trusted one hand, I might throw the whole thing at the wall. "He said it after my wedding," I said. Dad shrugged. "It's still important." That had been their answer to my entire life. Nolan is important. His first investor meeting was important. His college transfer was important. His engagement party to a woman he dated for 8 months was important. The condo my parents helped him furnish was important. The emergency bailouts. The career pivots. The ideas that cost everyone else money. The disasters rebranded as learning experiences. Everything in Nolan's life arrived with the kind of urgency usually reserved for natural disasters. My life, on the other hand, had always been treated like something durable enough to survive neglect. And to be fair, I had trained them to think that I was the stable one, the one who handled things, the one who did not call crying, did not ask for rescue, did not arrive home with unpaid debt or a half-baked business plan or a new crisis every quarter. I built my own graphic design consultancy from freelance jobs and midnight hours. I paid off my own student loans. I helped my parents with paperwork when my mother got overwhelmed and quietly sent money more than once when Nolan's ventures temporarily ran short. I was useful. And useful daughters are often confused with low-maintenance daughters. Low maintenance daughters are often treated like they can be postponed forever. By the time the wedding week arrived, my family had stopped pretending they planned to attend both events. My Aunt Celia sent a text saying, "Hope you understand, sweetheart. Your brother only gets one launch like this." My cousin Renee messaged, "We'll celebrate you properly later." My mother called the night before and said, "Try not to make tomorrow emotional." I was standing in my kitchen when she said that, staring at the tray of lemon cakes I had baked for the next morning, while the dishwasher hissed behind me. "I'm getting married tomorrow," I said. "What exactly would count as emotional?" She sighed the way she always did, when my pain interrupted her convenience. You know what I mean." No, I did know what she meant. She meant, do not embarrass us. Do not make your disappointment visible. Do not force us to feel ugly for what we have chosen. Ryan heard enough of that call to understand. He walked into the kitchen in sweatpants and a gray t-shirt, took the phone gently from my hand and hung it up without a word. Then he wrapped his arms around me from behind and rested his chin against the top of my head, while I stared at the cakes and tried not to cry over frosting. Ryan Mercer was not dramatic by nature. He was not loud, not possessive, not one of those men who mistakes control for devotion. He was calm in a way that made most people underestimate him the first few times they met him. Tall, quiet, sharp-eyed. The kind of man who listened all the way through before speaking. I and my family hated that about him, not openly. They were too polished for that, but they hated that he saw them clearly. Nolan once called him weirdly serious for a guy in finance. And Ryan had smiled and said, "That's one way to describe due diligence." No, my father disliked that Ryan never tried to charm him. My mother disliked that Ryan was unfailingly polite, while somehow making her feel examined. Nolan disliked that Ryan had money, actual money, the kind built on discipline and strategy, not family-funded drama and glossy branding. Most of all, they disliked that Ryan loved me like I was not incidental. People who benefit from your smallness rarely enjoy anyone who treats you like you take up your full size. Now, standing in that empty hall, I kept thinking maybe one more door would open. Maybe my mother would come rushing in with tears and excuses. Maybe my father would at least have the decency to look ashamed. Maybe Nolan, for once in his shining, selfish life, would see the scene he had created and understand what it cost. Nothing. Tessa looked at my face and whispered, "Nora." That was all she got out, because my phone lit up on the little table beside the entrance, vibrating hard enough to rattle against the wood. For a split second, hope stabbed through me so painfully I hated myself for it. I reached for the phone. The screen was bright with missed calls: Mom, Dad, Nolan, home, Aunt Celia, Dad again. Then 3 voicemails. My whole body went cold. Tessa frowned. "Now they're calling?" Before I could answer, a text message flashed across the screen. "Don't say anything yet, just come outside." It was from Ryan. I looked up so fast my veil shifted over my shoulder. He was not at the altar where he had been 10 minutes earlier, when the coordinator suggested a quiet delay. He was gone. The bouquet suddenly felt too heavy to hold. I set it down on a chair and tried to think past the pounding in my chest. "What does that mean?" Tessa asked. "I don't know." Another text came in. "Trust me." I stared at those 2 words. In another context, they might have annoyed me. I was not a woman who enjoyed mystery on major life occasions. But Ryan did not play games, not with me, not with anything important. If he was asking me to trust him, something had already shifted. Then the first voicemail began autoplaying, because my shaking fingers hit the wrong part of the screen. My father's voice came through sharp, furious, and unlike anything I had ever heard directed at me in public. "Nora, call me back right now. What the hell did you do?" The wedding hall went absolutely still. Even the photographer looked up. Tessa's mouth parted. "What did you do?" "I have no idea." But that was not true, not exactly. Somewhere beneath the humiliation and confusion, something else began to rise. A memory. 3 years earlier, when Nolan was starting one of his many businesses, he had shown up at my apartment with a folder and the shaky desperation of a man who already expected forgiveness. My mother came with him. She sat on my couch and said this was temporary, just a signature issue, just a bridge until the bank finished processing revised collateral, just family helping family. I had refused at first. Ryan and I were not even engaged then, but we were serious. And he had warned me more than once that my family used my reliability like a line of credit. Nolan cried, actually cried. Said this was his real chance. Said I knew how Dad was, how one more failure would destroy things between them. Said my signature would never truly be touched. Just procedural support. Just short-term reassurance for the lender. My mother took my hand and said, "One day when you need your brother, he'll remember this." That sentence should have been enough to stop me because even then I knew I would never need Nolan for anything honorable. But I signed, not because I believed in him, because I wanted one more time to believe my family meant what they said when they used the word family. Later, Ryan read the paperwork and went very still. "This is not a courtesy signature," he said. I remember the exact way he sat at my dining table, jacket still on, sleeves crisp, one hand flat on the contract. His voice was calm, which was when I knew he was angriest. "Nora, this ties you to more than they admitted." I called Nolan that night. He laughed it off, said Ryan was overreacting, said rich guys always think everything is a legal thriller. My mother told me not to start trouble over paperwork I did not fully understand. I was ashamed enough of my own stupidity that I let it go. That shame now came roaring back in the wedding hall, hot and sharp. Ryan knew about those documents better than anyone. He had not forgotten them, even when I tried to. The doors at the back of the hall opened. He walked in wearing a dark navy suit instead of his tuxedo jacket, tie loosened, expression composed in that dangerous way I'd seen only a handful of times in the years I'd loved him. He looked not angry exactly, decided. Everyone in the room turned toward him. He came straight to me, stopping just close enough that only I could hear the first thing he said. "We're leaving." I searched his face. "Why are they calling me like this?" His gaze flicked briefly to my phone, then back to mine. "Because your brother's launch just imploded." I stared at him. Behind us, Tessa inhaled softly. "What are you talking about?" Ryan reached for my bouquet, took it from my numb fingers, and set it aside on the front pew with almost absurd care. Then he looked me in the eyes and said very quietly, "They built part of that event on financing that still touches your name. I asked a few questions this afternoon. The bank asked a few of its own. Your family has finally remembered you exist." The room tilted, not physically, emotionally. The entire day suddenly rearranged itself around a new center. My parents had not skipped my wedding and then simply moved on. Something had happened over there, something big enough to turn all their attention back toward the daughter they treated like spare furniture. I should have felt vindicated first. Instead, what I felt was deeper and meaner. Of course, the moment they needed me, they remembered my number. Ryan took my hand. "Come outside," he said. "You're not standing in this room 1 second longer for people who made their choice." I let him lead me. That surprised me even then. Not because I did not trust him, because I am not built to move through shock by surrendering motion to someone else. But my body had reached its limit. My feet followed him automatically over the white aisle runner I had chosen myself, past candles and flowers and empty chairs that now seemed to mock every hopeful version of me that had existed 3 hours earlier. Outside, the evening air hit my skin cool and sharp. The sky had turned the pale gold of late afternoon. Valet attendants glanced over, then carefully looked away with the trained discretion of men who had seen rich people unravel in public before. My phone rang again in my hand. Dad, then Mom, then Nolan. Ryan opened the passenger door of the car and waited until I got in. Tessa came out just behind us, clutching the train of my dress in one hand and my emergency flats in the other. "Tell me I'm coming too," she said. Ryan gave one short nod. "You are." As soon as the doors shut, the world narrowed to soft leather seats, the faint scent of Ryan's cologne, and the relentless vibration of my phone against my palm. I looked at him while he started the engine. "What exactly did you do?" He glanced at me, then back at the road. "Nothing illegal, nothing dishonest." I asked the bank to clarify whether an old guarantor had consented to current use tied to Nolan's expansion. They froze activity until documentation could be verified. I felt my stomach drop. "Today?" "They chose today," he said. There was no heat in his voice. That was the terrifying part, just logic. My phone lit again. "Mom." Ryan nodded toward it. "Answer." I pressed speaker. The second my father heard my voice, he snapped, "Nora, fix this." Not hello, not where are you, fix this. Ryan's hand tightened slightly on the steering wheel. My brother's voice cut in behind him, loud and furious. If this is because of some wedding tantrum, you need to grow up. Investors are here. Something inside me, something old and tired and humiliated, began to change shape. Not louder, harder. I looked out through the windshield at the city blurring past in bands of gold light and glass and thought about the empty chairs, the dead still doors, the way my mother had told me not to make today emotional. Then I answered in a voice so calm I almost did not recognize it as my own. "You skipped my wedding," I said. "Now you can come to me." There was a beat of silence on the line. Then my father said, clipped and wary, "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "if you want anything from me, you show up. 7 o'clock, the Ashbourne Club. And when you get there, that you apologize before we discuss anything else." Part of me could feel Ryan's attention shift toward me without him taking his eyes off the road. My brother actually laughed. "You've lost your mind." "No," I said, "I found it." Then I ended the call. Tessa made a sound beside me that was half shock and half savage approval. Ryan's mouth had curved very slightly, and for the first time that day, I felt something stronger than grief. Control, not full, not clean, but enough to know that whatever happened next, I was done standing at the center of a room other people had emptied for me. At 7 o'clock, they were going to come to me, and this time they were not going to set the rules. The Ashbourne Club was exactly the kind of place my parents respected. Old money wallpaper, brass sconces, and quite carpeting thick enough to swallow footsteps and tempers at the same time. The kind of private club where rich people like to perform civility while tearing each other apart with smiles on their faces. Ryan had chosen it on purpose. By the time we arrived, I had changed out of my wedding gown in one of the upstairs guest suites the club kept for members and private events. Tessa helped me peel myself out of silk and pins and lace with the kind of gentle anger only real friends are capable of. Neither of us said much while she zipped me into a cream blouse and dark trousers Ryan had sent up from a boutique nearby through one of his assistants. My face in the mirror looked strange without the veil. Paler, sharper, less like a bride and more like a woman who had been publicly underestimated one time too many. Tessa stood behind me, gathering the discarded white fabric into careful folds. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I said. She nodded. "Good. I'd be worried if you were." That almost made me smile. Almost. When I stepped into the private conference room Ryan had reserved, the first thing I noticed was the glass wall overlooking the terrace. Beyond it, evening had settled into that soft blue hour when city lights begin to show through the windows one by one. Inside, the room smelled faintly of leather chairs, polished wood, and the expensive citrus cleaner places like this used to hide the fact that everything is old. Ryan stood near the head of the table, jacket off now, sleeves rolled once, a folder open in front of him. He had already switched fully into the version of himself most people never saw unless they were sitting across from him with money, risk, or a lie on the table, precise, calm, merciless in a way that never required raised volume. He looked up when I came in and his face changed just a little. Softened, not enough for anyone else to see, enough for me. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said. I closed the door behind me. "Yes, I do." That was the truth. Not because I wanted revenge immediately, because I knew my family. If I gave them even one night to regroup, they would rewrite the whole thing by morning. My mother would cry. My father would talk about misunderstanding and timing and how unfortunate the overlap had been. Nolan would rage for a while, then pivot to charm if rage failed. By tomorrow, they would all be trying to turn me from wounded party into emotional obstacle. Tonight, they were cornered by facts. Tonight, they still needed me. And that was the only reason they were coming at all. Ryan pulled out the chair beside his. "We'll keep this simple," he said. I sat. My hands were steady now. Funny how humiliation can burn itself clean into focus if it gets hot enough. Tessa took the seat across from me. "I'm not speaking unless you want me to," she said. "I know. You nod once if you want me to destroy someone." That got a real smile out of me. Ryan glanced at his watch. "They'll be late." "How do you know?" "Because people who think they still have leverage always arrive a little late." He was right. At 7:10, the glass door opened. My father came in first, broad-shouldered and red-faced. still in the dark suit he had clearly worn to Nolan's grand opening. My mother followed, pearls at her throat, hair immaculate, purse clutched against her side like armor. Nolan came last, no tie now, top shirt button undone. His expression looked like someone had stretched arrogance too thin over panic and called it confidence. Behind them was a man in his 50s I recognized after a second. Martin Keene. Nolan's CFO, if CFO could even be the right word for the cautious, gray-templed man who had once handled the financial cleanup after one of Nolan's previous collapses. Martin had the tired eyes of someone who spent too much time explaining risk to people who preferred vibes. No one greeted me. No one asked how I was. My father didn't even sit down before saying, "Let's fix this." The words landed in the room like an order. I leaned back slightly in my chair and folded my hands. "No." He blinked. "What?" "No," I repeated. "We're not starting there." My mother let out a slow breath through her nose. I'm already irritated that the script she had prepared was slipping. "Nora," she said, voice coated in false patience, "this has gotten out of hand." I looked at her. My full name in her mouth, spoken that way, had always meant one thing: return to your smaller shape. Become manageable. Become embarrassed enough to make this easier for us. Not anymore. "What got out of hand," I said, "was all of you choosing my brother's launch over my wedding and then calling me only when his money got stuck." Silence. Tessa crossed one leg over the other and stared at the ceiling like she was counting chandeliers instead of restraining herself. My father's jaw tightened. "We are not here to relitigate family hurt feelings." Ryan, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "You are here because a bank froze access tied to an unresolved guarantor issue connected to Nora's name. Everything else is context, important context." My father turned to him with open dislike. "This is family business." Ryan met his stare. "Then perhaps your family should have attended the wedding." That did it. Nolan slammed a hand flat on the table. "This is insane. A launch event got disrupted in front of investors because my sister wanted attention on the same day." I looked at him for a long second. There are moments when someone says exactly who they are so clearly it becomes a gift. Not because it hurts less, because it removes the last excuse for doubting what you are seeing. "You think I wanted attention?" I asked. He gave a bitter laugh. "What else is this?" I stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically, hammered just enough to change the shape of the room. "When I booked my wedding," I said, "you hadn't announced your launch. When invitations went out, every person in this room RSVP'd yes. My parents, our aunts, cousins, even people who only come to funerals and free meals. Then you scheduled your event later, and everyone decided you mattered more. So no, Nolan, this is not me wanting attention. This is you finally experiencing one afternoon where your life did not get to feed on mine without consequence." Nobody spoke. My mother looked away first. That told me everything. If she had truly believed they were right, she would have met my eyes. My mother only looked away when truth became too ugly to style. Ryan slid the folder across the table. "Before anything else," he said, "there are documents we should review." Martin stepped forward and took the folder. He skimmed the first page, then the second, and I watched his face shift from professional control into something closer to dread. "What exactly did you send the bank?" my father asked. Ryan answered without looking at him. "A request for clarification regarding continued use of a historical guarantor signature linked to expansion-related obligations." Nolan swore under his breath. "You had no right." Ryan finally looked at him. "Did she consent to the current use?" Nolan said nothing. Ryan's voice stayed calm. "Did she?" The silence stretched too long. Martin closed the folder softly. "That would be a no," he said. My father rounded on him. "Can this be reversed tonight?" Martin hesitated, which was answer enough. "This if the guarantor withdraws challenge and signs updated acknowledgement, possibly by morning," he said. "But investors have already noticed the hold, and the optics are—" He stopped. "Say it," Ryan said. Martin exhaled. "Bad." Nolan turned to me then, and I saw it happen. The shift. The ugly calculation beneath the anger. He still wasn't sorry, but he was afraid enough to imitate seriousness. "Nora, he said, voice suddenly lower, almost careful. If this is about the wedding, fine. I'm sorry you were upset. Tessa actually laughed out loud. I didn't. I just looked at him and said, try again. His eyes narrowed. What do you want? Not what happened, not how can I make this right. What do you want? People reveal themselves most clearly when they think remorse is a transaction. I sat back down. An apology, I said, a real one. From all of you before anything else. My father scoffed. You cannot hold business hostage over feelings. No, I said, but I can decide whether my name continues protecting people who humiliated me. That landed. My mother sank slowly into one of the leather chairs and looked suddenly older. Nora, she said quietly, we were wrong to miss your wedding. It was not enough. We both knew it. Still, it was the closest she had come to plain truth in years. I kept my eyes on her. Go on. Her fingers tightened around the clasp of her purse. We thought you would understand. That old sentence again, the family knife wrapped in soft cloth. I leaned forward. That phrase has stolen half my life. No one moved. When Nolan needed money, I was supposed to understand. When he needed introductions, I was supposed to understand. When Mom asked me to co-sign documents because it was temporary, I was supposed to understand. When holidays got rearranged around his schedule, when celebrations got postponed, when my work got treated like a hobby because it didn't come with a spotlight and a speech, I was supposed to understand. I looked at each of them in turn. Today was my wedding, and every one of you looked at that and decided I should understand one more time. My father's face hardened because that was how he responded when shame threatened to become visible. We came here, didn't we? There it was, the entitlement, the belief that showing up only after the damage touches them still counts as generosity. I nodded slowly. Yes. You came when the bank froze his launch. Nolan looked like he wanted to lunge across the table and shake me back into the role he preferred. You're enjoying this. That was the most insulting part, that he thought my composure was pleasure. I felt my mouth curve, but there was no warmth in it. No, I said, I'm finally hearing myself. Ryan slid a second set of paper from the folder. There are terms. My father bristled. Terms? Yes, I said. Nolan pushed back his chair. I'm not signing anything under pressure. Martin spoke before I could. You may want to see it before you say that. He had gone fully pale now, sweat at the temples, the look of a man who knew the room had crossed from family drama into recoverable liability if handled correctly, disaster if not. Ryan handed the papers to him first. Martin read fast and slower. Ryan, these are reasonable, he said carefully. Nolan spun toward him. Whose side are you on? Martin didn't blink. The side that keeps you out of deeper trouble. My father demanded the pages and scanned them. No outrageous demands, no fantasy punishment, just lines. A signed acknowledgement that my prior guarantor's signature had been obtained under family pressure and would not be reused, referenced, or attached to future obligations without written consent. Immediate reimbursement for the money I had personally contributed over the years toward Nolan's business, Bridges, each documented in Ryan's neat summary sheet. A written apology from Nolan that explicitly referenced my wedding day and the decision to skip it. A written statement from my parents confirming that any future family or business matter involving my name, credit, the how or assets required direct discussion with me and no assumptions of consent. And one final thing. No public spin using my name to clean up Nolan's launch story unless I approved the language first. Nolan's face darkened with every page. This is humiliating, he said. The room went very quiet. I looked at him and heard the sentence as if from far away because the answer was so obvious it felt almost tender. Yes, I said, now you know. My mother closed her eyes. My father put the papers down with exaggerated care, which meant he was angrier than if he had slammed them. This is what you've turned into? He asked. The question should have wounded me. Instead, it clarified everything that was left. I had not turned into anything. I had simply stopped absorbing what they handed me. No, I said. This is what you trained me for. Martin cleared his throat. If we execute this tonight and notify the bank first thing tomorrow, we have a chance to contain it. Nolan looked around the room as if someone might still save him from the existence of consequences. No one did. At last he sat down, grabbed the pen Ryan had placed near the folder, and signed the first page with a furious stabbing motion, then the next, then the apology statement, though he hesitated there long enough to make his hatred visible. My mother signed hers next, hand trembling. My father signed last, his expression so flat it was almost frightening. Not because he might explode, because I could see him realizing, for perhaps the first time, that authority inside a family can fail just like authority anywhere else. And that control works only as long as the person beneath it still wants belonging badly enough to keep paying for it. Tessa and Martin signed as witnesses. Ryan gathered the pages, tapped them neatly into alignment, and closed the folder. "It will be sent first thing in the morning," he said. For a second, no one moved. Then Nolan stood. "This isn't over." Ryan leaned back in his chair. "For you, maybe." But I spoke before Nolan could answer. "It is for me." He looked at me, breathing hard through his nose, and I knew what he wanted in that moment. A crack, a plea, some last glimpse of the sister who would rush in after the storm and help him rebuild while accepting a half apology and a holiday card as payment. He wasn't going to get her. My mother rose next. "Nora," I lifted a hand. "No, you don't get to soften this tonight." Her lips parted, then closed. My father gave one curt nod, not respectful, but defeated enough to imitate it, and they left. Just like that. The same people who had emptied my wedding hall walked out of a private room after signing paper they never imagined I would make them sign. When the door shut behind them, the silence felt different from the silence at the ceremony. That one had been abandonment. This one was aftermath. Tessa let out a long breath. "Well, I'd like to nominate Martin for surviving the world's worst family dinner." Ryan almost smiled. I didn't move for a second. My whole body felt strangely light and strangely shaky at the same time, like adrenaline was finally deciding whether to leave me or drown me. Ryan turned toward me. "How are you doing?" The question undid me more than anything else had all day. Not because I started crying. I didn't. Because it reminded me that the entire room had spent 2 hours treating me like a point of leverage, and he was still the only one asking how I was. I looked at the empty doorway, then at the folder on the table, then down at my own hands. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm done apologizing for being expensive to hurt." Ryan reached for my hand. "Good." I held on to that word the rest of the night. Good. Not petty, not dramatic, not too much. Good. But even then, somewhere under the exhaustion and the first thin edge of relief, I knew the papers were only the beginning. Because families like mine never believe a line is real the first time you draw it. They wait, they test, they try to pull you back into your old shape. And I had a feeling mine was about to learn, in public, exactly how much that shape had changed. Thought for a couple of seconds. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise in a hotel suite I had never planned to sleep in on my wedding night. That detail bothered me more than I expected. Not because the room was unpleasant. It was beautiful in the polished, neutral way expensive places are designed to be. Thick cream curtains, cool marble bathroom, sheets so soft they barely felt real. Somewhere below the windows, the city was still quiet except for the distant hiss of traffic beginning to build. Ryan was asleep beside me, one arm flung across the bed, his breathing deep and even. I should have felt safe. Instead, I lay there staring at the ceiling with a hard, wakeful ache in my chest. I was thinking about the dress folded into a garment bag across the room and the fact that I had walked out of my own wedding venue in trousers and a borrowed blouse. People like to imagine the satisfying part of a story begins the moment the villains are cornered. It does not. The satisfying part comes later, if it comes at all. First, there is shock. Then there is practical work. Then there is the strange grief of looking at something sacred and realizing other people turned it into a negotiation without your permission. Ryan woke a few minutes after I did and rolled onto his side. "You didn't sleep much," he said. It was not a question. "No." He pushed himself up on one elbow and studied my face. "Do you want to cancel everything today?" I knew what he meant. The brunch reservation, the photographer's second session. It's the hotel spa package Tessa had insisted on booking weeks earlier because, in her words, married women deserve hydration and champagne. The whole tidy little day after celebration I had built for a life moment, my family had managed to contaminate without even attending it. No, I said after a second. I want the day back. He nodded once. Then we take it back. That was one of the reasons I loved him. Ryan never rushed to fill my feelings with slogans. He did not tell me to be positive or that everything happened for a reason or any of the other useless things people say when they are more frightened by your pain than concerned for you. He treated my emotions like facts, real, worth organizing around. By 8:30, the first wave of messages started, not from my parents, from numbers I did not know. A local business reporter asking whether I could comment on the confusion surrounding Nolan's launch. A regional marketing blogger requesting a statement about family tensions impacting a major opening. A woman from a neighborhood social account I had never heard of asking whether the rumors about an empty wedding and a bank freeze were true. I stared at the screen, pulse slow and cold. How do they already know? I asked. Ryan, sitting at the small dining table in the suite with his laptop open, did not look surprised. Because investors talk, staff talk, valets talk, and people who get embarrassed in public always leak selective versions of the story before the facts settle. Tessa, who had arrived 10 minutes earlier, carrying 3 iced coffees and enough emotional loyalty to break furniture, it dropped into the armchair by the window. Also, she said, sliding one coffee toward me, there were maybe 40 people at that showroom opening, and at least 10 of them are the kind of rich bored people who treat other people's disasters like a networking opportunity. I took the coffee. It was cold enough to sting my teeth good. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my cousin Renee. Not a message, a voice memo. I almost deleted it unopened, then hit play. Her voice came in breathless and theatrical. Nora, please call me back. Aunt Diane is losing her mind, and apparently someone at Nolan's event said the bank locked everything because your name was tied to old financing. I know you're upset, but this is getting really public. I replayed one part. I know you're upset. That was how they would package it. Not betrayal, not neglect. And not a family choosing a son's optics over a daughter's wedding. Just Nora being upset and somehow making that inconvenience visible at the worst possible time. I handed the phone to Tessa without a word. She listened, made a face, and said, I would like 5 minutes alone with this entire bloodline. Ryan kept typing. What's the bank status? I asked. Documents will go over at 9, he said. Martin already confirmed receipt. I leaned back against the headboard and watched the morning light brighten along the far wall. Do you trust him? More than your brother. That was not exactly a high bar, but I understood what he meant. Martin was not loyal to Nolan. He was loyal to containment. Men like that could be useful because embarrassment sharpened them. At 9:06, my mother called. I let it ring 3 times before answering. That she did not bother with greeting. You need to stop ignoring people, she said. This is spreading. There it was again. Not how are you, not I'm sorry, not I cannot believe what yesterday became. This is spreading. I moved the phone slightly away from my ear and put her on speaker so Ryan and Tessa could hear every word. What exactly is spreading? I asked, a pause. People are talking. About what? Nora, don't do this. No, say it. I could hear her breathing, the faint clink of what sounded like dishes in the background. Probably her standing in the kitchen pretending normal life was still possible if she arranged the right sentences. About the launch, she said carefully. About the bank issue. About your wedding. My laugh came out softer than I meant it to. That's my wedding. Yes. The one none of you attended? Her voice tightened. We have already apologized. No, they had complied. That was not the same thing. I looked over at the folded garment bag in the corner again and felt something in me settle into place. You apologized because his money got frozen. That is unfair. No, I said. What was unfair was an empty ceremony room. The line went quiet. Then she tried a different angle, the one she always used when morality failed her and image mattered more. Your father's getting calls from people in the chamber. Nolan is trying to reassure investors. If anyone reaches out to you, the right thing would be to say it was a misunderstanding. I actually closed my eyes for a second, not because I was overwhelmed, because some part of me, even after all of it, I was still capable of being stunned by how shameless she could be when reputation was on fire. A misunderstanding, I repeated. Yes. You want me to lie. I want you to be loyal. Ryan's head snapped up from the laptop. Tessa mouthed wow without sound. There it was. The family gospel in one sentence. Loyalty as obedience. Loyalty as silence. Loyalty as accepting harm. Gracefully enough to keep the family brand polished. I sat up straighter. You taught me that loyalty meant showing up, I said. You just forgot it only applied when Nolan needed something. Then I ended the call. My hands were steady. That was new. Not the pain, the steadiness. The next call came from Nolan himself 20 minutes later. I did not answer. He followed with 3 texts in less than a minute. You need to shut this down. Investors are asking questions. Ma, if you ever cared about this family at all, call me. I stared at the screen. Then I took screenshots and saved them to a folder Ryan had created on my phone the previous night, titled simply Record. Do you think I'm overreacting? I asked quietly. Neither of them answered immediately, which made me look up. Ryan shut his laptop. Is that a real question? I shrugged one shoulder. My mother's voice is in my head. Tessa stood up so fast her chair legs scraped. Absolutely not, she said. No, I refuse. Your family skipped your wedding. Your brother's business got tangled in paperwork tied to your name, and now they want you to clean up the story for them. You are not overreacting. You are reacting for the first time in a way they can't ignore. Ryan nodded once. You're not escalating. You're declining to cover for them. That distinction mattered. It mattered so much I could have cried over it. Because for years, every time I tried to set a boundary, my family translated it into aggression. If I said no, I was dramatic. If I asked a question, I was difficult. If I wanted clarity, I was cold. And because I had spent most of my life trying not to be hard to love, I usually ended up apologizing before they did. Not this time. Around 11, Lily, no, not Lily now, Tessa. I corrected myself internally with a tired little pulse of irritation at my own brain, pulled up a local news clip on her phone. There, she said, you need to see this before someone sends it to you out of context. I moved beside her on the couch. The segment showed footage outside Nolan's showroom. Sleek glass building, branded backdrop, a ribbon-cutting area that now looked absurdly festive against the strained expressions moving through the frame. Nolan appeared in one shot, jaw tight, speaking too quickly to 2 men in suits. Behind him, staff stood by espresso machines and smiling hostesses who suddenly had nothing to hand to anyone except cups and embarrassment. The caption at the bottom read, "Grand opening hit by financial hold." Then the reporter added, in that bright local news tone people use when wrapping humiliation in professionalism, that the issue appeared connected to a guarantor clarification tied to legacy documentation. Legacy documentation. That was me. Not by name, yet. But the shape of my involvement was already in the air. Ryan watched the segment once, expression unreadable. They're softening it, he said. For now, Tessa added. I muted the clip and sat there staring at Nolan's face frozen on the screen. He looked furious, but beneath the fury, I could see the deeper thing. Confusion. He truly had not believed this could happen. Not because he thought the paperwork was clean, because he had never really believed my name carried weight unless he needed it to. That was what hurt the most. Not that my family used me, that they used me while sincerely thinking I was the lesser child. But by afternoon, the social media whispers had started turning into a pattern. Someone had posted a photo of the empty wedding chairs. Another account had picked up a blurry image from outside Nolan's event, with some caption about bad timing and family drama. The details were wrong in half the post and still more honest than anything my parents would have said. As my Aunt Diane texted me at 1:14. Family matters should stay private. I wrote back before I could second guess myself. Then family should have treated it like family. No emoji, no extra line, just that. She never responded. At 2, Ryan got an email from Martin confirming the bank had received the signed acknowledgments and would review the release by the end of day. Nolan's liquidity problem would most likely ease by morning. He read it aloud from the screen. I listened without relief. Is that bad? He asked gently. No, I said. I just realized I don't actually care whether he's saved. I only care whether he learned anything. Tessa snorted. Then you're going to be disappointed. Maybe. But by then I was starting to understand something else. Our this was no longer only about Nolan's money or my parents' apology or one ruined ceremony. It was about narrative. about whether I was going to let them turn me into the unstable sister who lashed out, or whether I was finally going to stand in my own version of events long enough for other people to see it too. Late that afternoon, the concierge called up to the suite. "There are visitors downstairs asking for you," he said. I knew before he finished who it was. My parents. Ryan stood before I even answered. "No," he said quietly. I looked at him. "I know." Into the phone, I said, "They're not invited." The concierge sounded relieved. "Understood." 10 minutes later, my mother texted, "We only want to talk." Then my father. "This attitude is helping no one." Then Nolan. "If you don't get ahead of this, our people will say things you can't take back." I stared at that message longer than the others, because in a twisted way, it was the first honest thing he had said all day. People would say things, and one said some of them would stay. About him, about them, about me, about who mattered enough to be attended, and who mattered only when paperwork started collapsing. I set the phone down and stood by the window, looking out over the city as the light shifted toward evening. My wedding was still gone. Nothing could cleanly return that. But the version of me who would have rushed downstairs, smoothed the scene, and agreed to some quiet family reset in exchange for crumbs of approval was gone too. That loss felt a lot less tragic. Ryan came to stand beside me. "What are you thinking?" I watched the reflections of traffic begin to streak gold along the avenue below. "I'm thinking they still believe this is a crisis they can manage," I said. He slid one hand into his pocket. And I turned to look at him. "And I think they're about to find out it's a change they can't reverse." Because the papers from last night had been step one. The calls, the pressure, the public whispering, those were only the tremors. The real shift had not happened yet. Not until they had to face me somewhere bright, public, and impossible to control. And when that moment came, I already knew one thing for certain. I was done being the daughter they kept in the background until they needed her signature. The thought for a couple of seconds. The invitation arrived 2 days later in a cream envelope with gold edging and my name written in calligraphy so careful it almost looked apologetic. Mrs. Nora Mercer and guest, not Nora and Ryan. Not the design studio owner they had ignored for years. Not the daughter whose wedding they had skipped. Mrs. Nora Mercer and guest. I stood in our kitchen, turning the envelope over in my hand while late afternoon light stretched across the counter and Ryan unpacked groceries behind me. "What is it?" he asked. I slid the card out and read it again. The city's annual Founders Gala, black tie, Chamber of Commerce, a room full of local investors, nonprofit board members, press, and the exact kind of polished people my parents had always treated like minor royalty. McNolan's company had been scheduled to receive a newcomer spotlight segment before the launch freeze turned his name into a quieter kind of headline. I looked up at Ryan. "This is not a coincidence." "No," he said, "it isn't." The interesting part was not the invitation itself. It was the timing. By then, the bank issue had technically been resolved. Martin had done his work. Nolan's frozen transactions had been released the morning after our meeting. My parents should have been relieved enough to retreat into their usual strategy, which was to wait for the emotional dust to settle and then act as if a lukewarm brunch could rewrite history. Instead, this invitation showed me they were nervous. Not about me, not yet. About the room. They knew public opinion had shifted just enough to become dangerous. They knew people were asking questions. They knew the story no longer belonged entirely to them. And most of all, they knew that if I walked into the same social circle they had tried to minimize me in, there was no guarantee I would stay small for them. Tessa nearly choked on her drink when I told her. "They invited you to that," she said. "Oh, they are terrified. They probably think it's damage control." "No," she said, leaning across my dining table with the kind of fierce certainty only a woman with no patience for nonsense can carry. "Damage control would be flowers and tears. This is image reclamation. They want you visible, but manageable, decorative, smiling just enough that people think everything is fine." That was exactly right. My mother called that evening, and for the first time since the wedding, her voice sounded almost careful. I heard you received an invitation," she said. "Yes." A pause. "It would be good if you came." I stood at the window while she talked, watching the reflection of my own face in the glass over the city lights outside. "Good for whom?" "Nora." That warning tone again, soft but loaded. This has all become larger than it needed to be. I let out a quiet breath. No, it became visible. Her silence on the line was so thin I could almost hear her deciding which version of motherhood would serve her best next. When she spoke again, she sounded tired. Not guilty, not broken. Tired in the way people do when their preferred version of reality becomes expensive. Your father and brother have both taken a hit over this. I laughed once without humor. Have they? You know what I mean. Yes, I said, I do. You're worried people noticed. People always notice, Nora. Then maybe you all should have. That ended the call faster than anything else could have. The day of the gala, I was calmer than I had any right to be. That surprised me. I had imagined rage, anxiety, at minimum, a low electrical panic under my skin. Instead, what I felt was a kind of cold steadiness, like the shaking part of me had finally burned away at the wedding and left only the frame underneath. Maybe that is what happens when grief finishes humiliating you. At some point, all that remains is truth and the question of whether you are finally willing to stand inside it. Ryan came home early with a garment bag in one hand and a look on his face that told me he had made some decisions without consulting me first. What's that? I asked, building that's a correction. He unzipped the bag and revealed a gown the color of deep midnight. Clean lines, elegant without trying too hard. Expensive in the way only truly excellent construction looks expensive, not flashy. Worse for my family than flashy. Certain. I touched the fabric and looked at him. You bought me a revenge dress? His mouth twitched. I bought you a room-changing dress. That made me smile. The actual revenge, if it came, would not be in the dress anyway. It would be in the fact that I was no longer interested in arriving apologetic. While I got ready, Ryan adjusted his cuffs in the bedroom and answered one call from Martin with clipped efficiency. I caught only fragments. No, Irish, won't discuss pre-cleared talking points. That sounds like his problem. Then he shouldn't have built public confidence on private carelessness. He hung up and caught my expression in the mirror. Martin wanted to know whether you'd be willing to keep conversation tonight focused on your design work. I met his gaze in the reflection. Did he now? He also phrased it as a mutual benefit. I laughed softly and turned back to my makeup. That's generous. Tessa arrived just before we left, ostensibly to help with earrings and lipstick, but really because she wanted front row access to the emotional execution she was sure the evening would become. When I stepped out in the finished look, she stared at me for a long second and put one hand over her heart. Oh, she said, that's mean. Ryan, who had seen me half an hour earlier, but just looked at me the way he always did when I remembered my own size. Like the room had already changed and I had not even walked into it yet. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Regent, the kind of hotel built to flatter important people into feeling eternal. Marble entry, crystal chandeliers, polished black floors reflecting gold light so warmly it made everyone look richer and kinder than they were. When we stepped out of the car, beneath the porte cochere, cameras were already flashing near the entrance. Not red carpet chaos, just local society page photographers and event media, the small ecosystem of attention my mother treated like divine judgment. For one second, as Ryan offered me his arm, I felt the memory of the wedding hall rise up inside me. Empty chairs, cooling candles, that awful bright stillness. And then I took a breath and let it pass through me. This was not that room. I was not that woman anymore. Inside, the ballroom was already humming, glassware clinking, low conversation, the soft instrumental swell of a jazz trio near the far wall. The air smelled faintly of champagne, lilies, and money. And there they were, my parents near the donor table, my mother in dark green silk, posture perfect, smile too fixed, my father in a tuxedo he wore like armor, Nolan a few feet away with a drink in his hand, and that brittle look I now recognized as the face he made when he thought confidence might still win if he held the pose hard enough. They saw me almost instantly. You could actually watch the change move through them. My mother's smile paused. My father's shoulders went tighter. Nolan, in who had been speaking to two men from a real estate group, stopped mid-sentence. I had imagined that moment for days. What surprised me was not how satisfying it felt. It was how cleanly it confirmed everything. They had never expected me to walk into a room like that looking composed. They had expected either absence or apology. I offered neither. We had barely made it past the first champagne tray when the first real shift happened. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and a pearl draped neckline stepped in front of us, smiling warmly. Nora Mercer? I nodded. I'm Elise Donnelly. We haven't met properly, but I know your husband through the development board. I just wanted to tell you I admire your restraint. I almost laughed. Not because she was wrong. Not. And because wealthy people have a way of discussing fresh emotional bloodshed as if it were a panel topic. Thank you, I said. She touched my arm lightly. Your family should have come to your wedding. Then she moved on before I could answer. Ryan leaned toward me just enough to murmur, That is not a random opinion. That's a test balloon. He was right. The room was talking. Not loudly, not directly. But in the rooms like that, social pressure moves like perfume. Hard to trace, impossible to miss once it spreads. We had not even reached the center of the ballroom before two men from a venture fund stopped Ryan to greet him. One of them turned to me and said, We've heard your name several times this week. The line was polite. The meaning was not. I smiled the way women do when they know every person involved understands more than the words allow. I hope in a good context, I said. He gave a small, knowing laugh. In an interesting one. There it was, interesting. That was how people with clean cufflinks referred to public family humiliation when it touched money. I let Ryan take the conversation for a few minutes while I watched the room. My parents were still pretending not to approach us. Nolan had moved farther toward the investor cluster, but he kept glancing over. Then the gala host announced the beginning of the founder recognition segment. People began drifting toward the front. The room tightened into rows and aisles in careful attention. Nolan's company had not been removed from the printed program, but his spotlight had clearly been shortened. I could see him realize it in real time when his introduction came out clipped and bloodless, all promise, no glow, no launch photos, no enthusiastic mention of momentum, just a neutral acknowledgement of a new local enterprise. That was its own kind of punishment. He walked up, accepted polite applause, and gave a short speech that sounded over-rehearsed and underlived. He smiled in the right places, thanked investors, thanked the community, spoke about resilience, innovation, and exciting growth. Not one mention of family. That omission was louder than any confession. When he stepped down, the applause faded quickly. Then came the mingling again. This time, the people came to me. Not in a mob, in a flow, enough to be unmistakable. A woman from the Arts Foundation who had once ignored my business card at a holiday mixer asked about my studio. A marketing director from a regional hotel group asked whether I was taking new branding clients. A pair of local investors, men who had been photographed at Nolan's launch 2 nights earlier, stopped beside my table, and one of them said, with a warmth sharpened by curiosity, You're Nora. We've been meaning to meet you. No mention of Nolan. No mention of the wedding. That was the elegance of rooms like that. They never say the sharpest part aloud. They simply adjust their attention and let everyone feel where the weight has moved. I answered questions about my work, real questions, about rebrands, small business identity systems, hospitality campaigns, digital rollout strategy. Things I had built with my own hands while my family talked about Nolan like he was the only child in the bloodline capable of ambition. I gave out 3 cards, then 6, then more. At some point, I realized Nolan had gone completely still across the room, one hand around a drink he had stopped pretending to sip. My mother came over first, of course she did. She wore a smile that would have looked gracious to anyone who did not know how much effort it cost her to keep her teeth from grinding. Nora, darling, she said, air kissing near my cheek, you look beautiful. Thank you. She glanced at the 2 women standing with me from the Chamber's hospitality committee and said, We're so proud of how creative she's always been. Always. The shamelessness of that word almost impressed me. I turned toward her fully. That's not true. The women beside us went still. My mother blinked. Excuse me? You're not proud because I'm creative, I said, still calm. You're proud because other people are looking. The color in her face shifted. Not much. Just enough. One of the committee women pretended to study her champagne flute. The other suddenly became very interested in a centerpiece 3 feet away. No one interrupted. Wealthy women know when something worth hearing is happening. My mother lowered her voice. This is not the place. I smiled faintly. You said that about my wedding, too. She went silent. My father appeared beside her then, summoned by instinct or fear. What seems to be the issue? He asked. The old version of me would have flinched at that tone. The implied authority. The assumption that he could still walk up, name the atmosphere, and make it his. The new version simply looked at him and said, no issue, just accuracy. He stared. Behind him, Nolan was finally approaching. You could feel it before he arrived, that charge of discomfort people emit when they know a scene may be about to happen but are too socially trained to move away quickly enough. When Nolan reached us, he went for charm first. Big mistake. Nora, he said, smiling at the little circle around us, can I steal my sister for a minute? I looked at him. No. The women beside me both blinked. Ryan, standing just to my left, said nothing. He did not need to. Nolan's smile thinned. We need to talk. We already did. You signed papers. About the bank, he said through his teeth. No, about my life not being collateral anymore. That line landed. I saw it hit not just him, but everyone within earshot. For the first time all night, his mask slipped. Not fully, enough. Do you really want to do this here? He asked. I thought about empty chairs, missed vows, my father's voicemail, my mother calling loyalty what she meant as obedience. Then I looked at my brother, standing under crystal lights in a ballroom full of people whose respect he had always chased harder than my dignity, and I understood something with absolute clarity. He was still asking the wrong question. He still thought the problem was location, as if cruelty becomes acceptable when committed in private. I held his gaze and spoke softly enough that everyone leaned in a little to hear. No, I said, you did this here. And suddenly the room was not his anymore. It was mine. Thought for a second. For a second after I said it, nobody moved. The room did not go silent all at once. It happened in layers. A nearby laugh died halfway through. Someone lowered a glass. The jazz trio kept playing in the corner, but softer now in my perception, as if the whole ballroom had shifted a few inches away from itself to make space for what had just been said. Nolan stared at me like he honestly could not believe I had used a full sentence against him in public. That had always been his blind spot. He thought power belonged to whoever took up the most air. He never understood what it meant when the quiet person stopped making room. My father recovered first, of course. He stepped slightly forward with the look he used at church committees, school boards, family funerals, and every other place where authority mattered more to him than truth. That's enough, he said. The old reflex rose in me so fast it felt physical. Years of conditioning. Years of being the daughter who softened, the daughter who adjusted, the daughter who knew exactly when to go quiet so everyone else could keep pretending they were decent. And then, just as quickly, the reflex passed. No. Enough had been years ago. Enough had been the first time my mother asked me to sign a paper for Nolan and called it temporary. Enough had been every dinner where my work got summarized in one sentence before the conversation returned to my brother's latest expensive mess. Enough had been an empty wedding hall. I looked at my father and said very evenly, you don't get to decide that anymore. That one line did more damage than yelling ever could have, because yelling would have let them write me off as emotional. This was worse. This was control. Around us, people began pretending not to watch while very clearly watching. A woman from the hospitality committee had frozen beside a floral arrangement with her phone halfway down at her side. One of Nolan's investors took a slow sip of his drink and did not even attempt to hide his interest. A board member from the chamber, a woman with silver hair and a face like carved stone, turned just enough to catch every word. My mother stepped in before my father could answer. Nora, she said, voice pitched low and urgent, stop this now. There it was again. Not let's fix this. Not we were wrong. Not please stop this. As if the problem was not what they had done, but the fact that I was refusing to absorb it quietly. I turned toward her. What exactly am I stopping, Mom? Her mouth parted, closed. I kept my voice calm. Am I stopping you from enjoying the evening? Am I stopping Nolan from networking? Or am I stopping all of you from pretending my wedding was a scheduling conflict instead of a choice? Nolan let out a short, bitter laugh. You really want to make yourself the victim here? That word, victim. People like my brother love that word because they think it turns harm into weakness. They think the moment a woman names what was done to her, she becomes smaller, more emotional, easier to dismiss. But that only works if she is still trying to be accepted by the people hurting her. I wasn't. No, I said, I'm making myself visible. He opened his mouth, but Ryan spoke before he could. Careful. Just that, one word. Ryan had not raised his voice. He did not need to. He stepped half an inch closer to me, not possessive, not theatrical. I'm simply present. A reminder that I was not alone and that Nolan was no longer dealing with the same sister he had always manipulated through shame and family pressure. Nolan looked at him and scoffed. This is rich coming from the guy who weaponized paperwork. Ryan did not blink. No, I clarified paperwork. You weaponize family. A few feet away, someone actually inhaled. That was the thing about truth in a polished room. It rarely needs volume, it just needs enough stillness around it to land. My father's face had gone a dangerous kind of red, but he was too socially trained to explode. Men like him reserve their worst behavior for rooms without witnesses, so instead he tried dignity. We are not discussing private matters in public. I smiled without warmth. You forfeited private handling when you skipped my wedding and then called only when his launch money got frozen. My mother hissed my name under her breath, scandalized not by the facts but by the fact that other people now had them in the right order. That was all they had ever really feared, not wrongdoing. Sequence. Because sequence makes guilt harder to style. One of the investors Nolan had been courting stepped closer then, glass still in hand, expression careful. Is this related to the guarantor story? He asked. The question was politely phrased, but it landed like a hammer. Nolan swung toward him too fast. That has been resolved. The investor did not take his eyes off me. That has it? There are moments when you understand that the social tide has turned so completely, it would almost be kind to step back and spare people further humiliation. I did not feel kind, but I was not cruel either. I was exact. It was resolved legally, I said. Emotionally is another matter. No shouting, no grand speech, just enough. The investor gave one slow nod, the kind people use when they have just learned the answer to a question they will absolutely repeat later in better company. My mother saw it too. I watched panic move behind her eyes like a light switching on in a dark house. Nora, she said suddenly softer, please. That word almost got me. Please. Not because I believed it, because for one stupid aching second it sounded like the mother I used to want. The one who might finally see me, finally choose me, finally understand the cost of what she had asked me to swallow for years. Then I looked at her properly and saw what was really there. Not love, fear, fear of social fallout, fear of gossip, fear of the family image cracking in a room full of people she had spent decades trying to impress. And just like that, the ache burned clean again. You should have said please when I was standing in my wedding dress, I told her. That was the line that broke the room open. Not into chaos, into clarity. You could feel it in the stillness around us, in the subtle but unmistakable shift of faces, in the way several people nearby stopped pretending to be occupied, in the way Nolan's investor took a careful step back from him instead of from me. He knew now, maybe not every detail, enough. My father tried once more. This is family, he said. This as if the word itself still carried unquestioned moral authority. Yes, I said, that's why it matters. He had no answer for that. For the first time in my life, I watched my father stand in public with nothing useful to say because the role he had always relied on, patriarch, mediator, final authority, required my cooperation to function, and I was no longer giving it. Nolan's face hardened into something uglier. You think this makes you look good? He asked. No, I said. I think it makes me look honest. He laughed again, sharper this time. You're enjoying humiliating your own family. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the sweat just visible at his temple beneath the ballroom lights, at the tension in his jaw, at the wounded outrage of a man who had always mistaken impunity for importance. Then I answered the only way I could. You humiliated me first, I said. I'm just refusing to hide it for you. That was the final turn, not because it was dramatic, because it was irrefutable. A truth people could repeat in plain language. And once a truth like that exists in a room, all the charm in the world cannot pull it back into secrecy. The silver-haired chamber board member stepped closer then, the same woman who had spoken to me earlier. Her voice was cool and publicly neutral. Perhaps tonight is not the best evening for further family discussion. It sounded like a rescue. It was not. It was an elegant dismissal, and Nolan knew it. So did my parents. The board member turned to me, not them. Ms. Mercer, I would love to hear more about your studio when you have a moment. There it was, the shift, complete and visible. When she was not offering charity, she was repositioning status, my name, my work, my presence, not as an extension of Nolan's mess or my father's family, but as something with its own center of gravity. I felt Ryan's hand brush lightly against the back of mine, not guiding me, just there. My mother looked like she wanted to argue, but the room had already decided what kind of scene this was. Any further protest from them would only make the humiliation worse. And now, for once, they understood that. Nolan stepped back first, then my father. My mother followed half a second later, her smile gone completely now, replaced by that brittle blankness women of her generation wear when rage and shame are being forced into good posture. They did not say goodbye. They just turned and moved toward the far side of the ballroom, and where fewer people stood and the light felt dimmer. I watched them go. I expected triumph. What I felt instead was something quieter, distance, the kind that finally opens when you stop mistaking history for obligation. The board member asked me 2 questions about my studio. An investor from a hospitality group asked for my card. Another woman mentioned a branding project for a cultural nonprofit. The room did what rooms like that always do. It metabolized scandal fast and redistributed attention wherever it sensed strength, novelty, or usefulness. This time, some of that attention settled on me. Not because of pity, because I had held my ground without begging anyone to understand it. By the time the gala ended, I had 3 genuine business leads, 1 coffee meeting set for the following week, thus and exactly 0 interest in checking whether my family had stayed until dessert. Outside, the night air felt cooler than I expected. The city hummed softly around us. Valets moved in practice lines. Cameras flashed somewhere farther down the drive for another arriving donor couple who had no idea a family hierarchy had just collapsed 10 yards away. Ryan opened the car door for me, but before I got in, he paused. You okay? That question again. Always that question. Not how did it play? Not do you think they learned anything? Not was it worth it? You okay? I stood there in the dark blue dress, heels sinking slightly into the carpeted entry, and looked back at the hotel's tall golden windows. Through the glass, I could still see the blur of chandeliers and moving silhouettes. Somewhere in there. Now, my parents were probably already trying to recover. Nolan was probably explaining, reframing, blaming. That was his instinct. My mother was likely performing a dignity. My father would be furious in the silence of the ride home. Maybe they would never truly understand what they had done. Maybe understanding was too much to ask from people who had built their comfort on my patience. But something had changed anyway, not in them, in me. Yes, I said finally, I think I am. Ryan nodded, like he had been waiting for that answer, without needing to hear it sooner. We drove home with the windows cracked and the city lights slipping past in long bright lines. I took off my heels halfway there and tucked my feet under me in the passenger seat, the way I always do when I feel safe enough to stop performing. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Then Ryan said, You know they'll keep trying. I looked out at the buildings, at reflections in glass, at strangers crossing under streetlights without any idea that my whole life had just tilted into a new shape. I know. Do you know what you'll do? This time I did smile. Yes. He glanced over briefly. And I'll decide case by case whether they get access to me, I said, not because I'm angry, because they've mistaken access for entitlement for too long. He reached across the console and squeezed my hand once. That, he said, sounds like a woman I'd marry. The laugh that came out of me then was small and real and a little wrecked around the edges. Good enough. The weeks after that were quieter than I expected. My family called, of course. At first too often, then more strategically. My mother left one voicemail crying. It's my father sent one message saying we should talk when emotions settle, which told me he still believed the truth had an expiration date if he waited long enough. Nolan texted twice about possible collaboration between my studio and one of his repositioning efforts, which was so perfectly shameless, I almost admired the consistency. I did not respond to any of them right away. When I eventually answered, it was rarely and in writing. Clear boundaries, no vague openings, no emotional labor donated free of charge. My studio grew, not overnight, not magically, but steadily. The gala connections turned into contracts. One hospitality rebrand led to another. A nonprofit redesign brought in referrals. People who had once met me as Nolan's older sister started meeting me as Nora Mercer, founder and creative director. And it was a small shift on paper and a huge one in my bones. I stopped checking whether my family approved. That was the real freedom. Not public vindication, not the look on Nolan's face, not even the business opportunities. Freedom was no longer organizing my self worth around whether the people who hurt me were finally embarrassed enough to notice. A month later, Ryan and I went away for a weekend. Nothing flashy, just a quiet inn on the coast with salt in the air, white curtains moving in the breeze, and mornings slow enough that coffee could actually stay hot in the mug before life demanded something from me. On the second evening, I stood barefoot on the porch outside our room, watching the sky go lavender over the water while Ryan read inside. The wind smelled like seagrass and cedar. Somewhere below, the waves moved against rock in a patient rhythm that made every human drama feel briefly small. I thought about the wedding hall, the empty chairs, the bouquet in my shaking hands, the old version of me who would have seen that moment only as abandonment. Now I saw something else in it too, a line. The moment life finally forced me to stop pretending love and access were the same thing. My family had always assumed I would stay available because I had always stayed decent. They mistook dignity for compliance, quiet for softness, loyalty for endless forgiveness. They were wrong. And that is the thing nobody warns you about when you grow up being the reliable one. The day you stop carrying what everyone else drops, they do not call it healing. They call it betrayal. Let them. I think some people only know how to love you in the shape that benefits them. It is not cruelty to step out of that shape. It is survival. And sometimes, if you do it calmly enough, clearly enough, and without asking permission, it becomes something even better than survival. It becomes peace.